You are listening to Awe, Adulting with Ebony, a podcast for the awesome weirdos, creatives, seekers, healers, space holders, and personal development veterans who are ready to self-actualize and take their unique magic to the next level. This is for you if you identify as a spiritual being having a human, physical, and emotional experience and sometimes struggle to focus or know what to trust and what to tune out. I'm your host, Ebony Allard, aka Ebony Alchemy. I'm a neurodivergent modern mystic, author, artist, and facilitator. I'm an international award-winning master coach, certified in multiple brain integration technique and human design. I've been in the personal development, creativity, and entrepreneurship spaces all of my life, and I have a special interest in the psycho-spiritual development of human beings that I share by helping you lead yourself to greater empowerment, embodiment, and full self-expression. Stick around to hear raw and real conversations about the reality of adulting, personal growth, self-actualization, and mysticism through the lens of curiosity as I ask, what part of being an adult do you think we all suck at? And what part of being a grown-ass adult are you in awe of? Hello, my loves. In this episode, I'm joined by Emma Louise Dyson. Emma is an accredited crystal practitioner and approved training provider with the International Practitioners of Holistic Medicine, and has also studied with the renowned Gemological Institute of America. Having shared her expertise on 6 continents as well as on global TV channels, Emma has inspired countless individuals worldwide and nurtured their passion for nature's treasures. As a shamanic, witch, and earth medicine practitioner, she's studied ancient wisdom and nature-based healing techniques, and her passion for herbalism, foraging, and natural medicine has guided her on a continuous quest to uncover the healing properties of plants. By blending the magical energy of crystals, herbs, and plants, she weaves a tapestry of enchantment, infusing her practices with a layer of transformative power. And in this episode, which is the one about being a rebellious people pleaser, we talk about boundaries and people pleasing and the surprising ways that we've been healing and reclaiming our sovereignty. We talk about the misconceptions of perception, discovering new layers of authenticity, the unexpected ways that boundaries have created space and freedoms in both of our lives. And she shares a story, and I'm really curious, would you have gotten anxiety from the situation that Emma shared? It's really interesting to talk with someone who is not officially diagnosed with ADHD, but is recognizing those signs and symptoms within herself. Because whilst I predominantly work with those of us who have neurodivergent or brains that work differently, or understand and see the world differently, I don't always work with people who are diagnosed, because I wasn't diagnosed until last year. So it was a really interesting conversation where we dived into some of the beliefs around that, and then the nuance of beliefs and how they sit under the values, and how very often we think we have values that are shared with the people in our lives until we dive a bit deeper. We talked about facing our good girl fears and the ways that the universe has got us to take ownership. We talked about how we have both become okay with not being understood or liked, and being okay with showing up as a natural woman, and how healing the good girl or the people-pleasing part is actually really, really linked to the maturity of femininity. And then in the Patreon part, we go on to discuss how she gave up her successful business and really special home because soul said so, and what happened when she did. If you are ready, dive in. And if you haven't yet become a patron, I really hope that you do. I loved this episode, and I'm really, really enjoying this season. And I would love to hear some of your feedback. And if you do review the show, send me a screenshot and I will send you a credit note to use on my art store, ebonyalchemy.com. For now, enjoy. Hello, my love. I am so excited that we're finally getting to have this conversation.
Me too.
Because you and I could talk about absolutely anything, I'm also excited to see what we end up talking about.
I love that. And I love that, this is just natural and organic, and we're just going to go with the flow rather than having to have something kind of polished and sorted. So this is very much up my street.
And I want to pick up on that in a minute, and I would love us to dive into it, because from the outside, you have always seemed like someone who is open and authentic, and I think, you know, a lot of people say that about me. And then before we had this conversation, or before we pressed record, we were talking about the layers and the nuance of that. So I want to dive back in, but before we do that, I want to know, what part of being a grown-up or an adult are you either, and you can pick, most in awe of, or think we all suck at?
Okay, so I am going to say most in awe of, that I think for me, it is that really stepping into your embracing your full self, and setting some boundaries. You know, I've always been a bit of a people pleaser and wanting everybody to like me and all of this, you know, everybody, oh gosh, what if they think this and what if they think that, even though I've always been a bit of a rebel and you know, spoke out about things. It's still that, like, wanting people to like me, and not wanting to say no to people. My mom is very much about, you know, what will the neighbors think and what will these people think and all of these things. So and so now for me, in my 40s, I am loving that I get to set some clear boundaries. I get to say no to things, and that's okay. Like, there's nobody's gonna die. It's not nothing bad's gonna happen. It's really helped me to just make more room, make more space in my life by being able to say no to things.
I love that answer, and I hear you, I feel you, I see you. What's interesting for me in that are two things that you said. One was around like potentially learning that or modeling that from a mum, right, who cares about what other people think, or cares about what their neighbors think, and all of that sort of stuff. And I also, on the outside, other people might, so the other piece of what you said was something about being a rebel and like being seen as wild, right, and untamed. I think that people might see that in both of us, and therefore believe that we're not a good girl, or that we don't have conformist tendencies. And one of the things that I have said about misfits my whole life, like my brand has been about misfits forever, and people always say, oh yeah, rebels. And I'm like, for me, and it's the autism that needs to get the words right. For me, the difference between a rebel and a misfit is that a rebel is proving something and pushing against something and going back on something, like is fighting against something, and there's prove energy and it's on purpose. And a misfit, most misfits are the most compliant people you will ever meet. They don't, they just want to know the rules so that they can be safe. And that for me is the bit where all of the good girl stuff comes from. And they're like, just tell me the rules, just tell me the rules, so that or like always looking for the acceptable, appropriate, conformist behavior that will keep me safe. And in sociology, one of the things I really loved, I did sociology A level. I've talked about this before. I got really shit mark at the end of year one, tried to leave, he wouldn't let me. I spent the summer playing, having fun. It must have all soaked in, and he was a genius for knowing this. Came out, got like A stars, and then got top 10 in the country for my sociology paper, because I have this ability to sit in anyone's mind, right, and see things from 1,000 different perspectives.
Love that.
This exercise that we did, where he was talking about a study where they went into a supermarket and they took all the stuff off the shelves and put it in people's trolleys, or took stuff out of trolleys, and there was a conversation around morals, ethics, values, and what's legal and not legal, and all of that stuff. And that's always been really fascinating for me. So most of the time I am a rule breaker, because in my head there are two types of rules. There's rules that keep you safe. I will adhere to those. There are rules that keep some people in power, and they are and I don't see hierarchy, and I won't play.
Yep, you're preaching to the converted.
Yeah, so there's that piece around being seen as wild and authentic and having your heart on your sleeve and being quite messy, and people always say they really appreciate my rawness and all of that.
Yeah.
And then there's what the reality on the inside. um yeah, and I'd love to hear you talk about that and whether that's true for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I have been exploring is this, this world, this whole new world that's just opened up to me with around ADHD. And for me, I was quite naive, but also quite judgmental around the whole thing. It's like, oh, it's just an excuse for badly behaved kids. It's completely ignorant to all of it. And then now there just seems to be, a lot more people who are talking about it, a lot more people open. I actually sent 2 videos to my ex and said something about ADHD, and he's like, you don't have ADHD, blah, blah. And I sent him a couple of videos and he watched them and he came back and he was like, oh my God, that is you. Like that is actually you. And the more I've explored it, the more I am learning that a lot of this, yes, this people pleasing thing, this wanting everybody to like me, this doing the right thing, this good girl thing, right? A lot of that definitely came from my mom. And she's still very much like that now. She won't go out without any makeup on. She's at the hairdressers every 4 weeks to get her roots done. She's not really cool. I've just been through this process for the last 10 months where I've been growing my grey out, and then I was like, oh, I'm bored of it, but I don't want to use any more chemicals. I'm going to use some henna. Yeah, and she was like disgusted that I was growing my grey hair out at 42 years old. Like, you why do you want to look old? Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, right? But one thing is this, so I was sat with my partner Mark. He was in the van. I actually recorded a TikTok video about this and I haven't published it yet, but here we were in the van and we were in this very narrow road and it would be very difficult for another car to get past. And he's just like, I'll just put the van here because I need to go and see a client. And I'm sitting in the van, not my van, not my client, nothing. And I am cringing, looking in the wing mirrors, thinking, fuck, what if somebody comes past? They're not going to be able to get past. What are they going to do? They're going to, like, I'm going to have to shout him out of the window. Like, having this real anxiety around other people not being able to pass the van. And like, it sounds really insane and bizarre, but what I'm learning is this is potentially a trait from from having ADHD, and this fear, this horrible, like, I genuinely feel this in my stomach, like that people might not like me or might be angry with me. This feeling of impending doom. I get an email from somebody and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I haven't even opened it, but like automatically thinking, what have I done wrong? Not so much now because I work for myself, but when I worked for people, and so many things are becoming clear around this. And I know it's kind of off topic a little bit, but still relevant. So yeah, healing this people pleaser, and the last 3 years have been massive for me, being forced to be in a place where people don't like me. With everything that's been going on in the world, I've been very vocal and very real about my views and my thoughts, and using my social media as a platform to really share that. I think the hardest thing around all of that was everything that I was sharing was coming from a place of love. So I'll give you an example. September 2020, we were in full lockdown here in the UK, and I went down to London with a group of other like-minded people to protest against everything that was going on. And there are around 40,000 of us in Trafalgar Square. And I walked into Trafalgar Square and this lady approached me and she had this bag and she says, put your hand in and pick a crystal. So we haven't talked about this, but I've worked with jewelry and gemstones and crystals for the last 2 decades. And I pulled out this red jasper, and it was just around grounding and just feeling grounded in what I was doing. And it was just a beautiful moment, and I hugged her, and I was just like, there's so many gorgeous people that were surrounding me. And so I did a couple of Facebook lives, and obviously there was no media coverage, right? None at all, nothing being broadcast on anywhere. So people were genuinely shocked to see 40,000 people together when we've all been told to, you know, wear masks and isolate and all of this, and we were all coming together. And it was horrendous, the amount of hate that I received when everything that I was doing was from a place of love and compassion, and because I really fucking cared so much that I was willing to receive all of this hate in the hope that I would be able to inspire or give somebody else the support that they're not on their own through all of this. And the amount of people that would send me inbox messages like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for being so brave, thank you so much for standing up, you know, you've really inspired me, was amazing. But the hate was real. Somebody shared one of my live videos into the local village Facebook group that I lived in, and I called up my ex on the way home, and I'm like, there's going to be people at the door with like flames, like torches and pitchforks, like it was like a witch hunt.
Really strange time, right?
Yeah.
Really strange time. I mean, I had one of my best friends at the time tell me that I was so selfish by not doing that, doing that thing, that I was killing children and
I
making
got called
people sicker.
Yeah, I got called a granny murderer, and my best friend, we still don't speak.
And that's what happened with two of my closest friendships. And it was like, to take it away from that conversation and to bring it back to this piece around conforming and boundaries and sharing your truth and all of that. That time for me was so important for so many of us, because what it did do was reveal a level of truth and vulnerability. And yes, there was difference of opinions, and yes, there were, none of us were very equipped to deal with that yet, because we had all learned how to put ourselves in situations and have friends and stuff that mostly agree with us. We met on values, and what I learned with my closest friends was that we did have values that were a match, freedom being one of them, but the beliefs that sit underneath that we never checked, because we'd had no reason to, right? Like, there's never been a situation to really look at, what does freedom mean to you, and if you have to prioritize this over that, what does that look like? For me, I travel a lot. I love to travel. I've the longest I've ever lived in one country or one place. My whole life at 42 is 4 years, one place. That's a long time for me.
Yeah, I hear you.
When I came to Spain, again, divine guidance just before it all happened, and I'm very glad I listened and moved so that I could be somewhere warm, and I couldn't hear everything, and so I wasn't as impacted by it, like all of that stuff. I had no idea what that was going to mean, but I was fully willing to never travel again, rather than give up this other freedom, because the freedom of my body was greater than my freedom of movement. And so that real nuance around understanding where because I think what's tied up in all of this is safety and communication, and like what we're willing to get uncomfortable about and what we're not willing to get uncomfortable about.
Yeah, definitely. And I felt that as well. Like, I traveled a lot. I worked at sea on cruise ships for years. I left home when I was 17 and worked as a dancer, and lived like all over the UK. I met somebody and I moved to America. So I was living in Colorado, but still kind of cruising. And then, moved back to the UK, still doing a lot of traveling. I was here, there, and everywhere like yourself. And I actually said the same thing. I'm like, I am so grateful for all of the opportunities that I've had to travel, and I am willing now to just kind of draw a line in the sand, and I'm not gonna, like you say, like, freedom over my body is more important than anything. And to watch yeah, to go through that process myself, but to watch other people's processes. And I found that was really interesting, like what people valued over certain things. I thought was really, really interesting. But going back to the people pleasing, like the last 3 years have been the biggest lesson with me being okay with people not liking me and not understanding me and not having to defend myself. Like I went through this whole process of, always having to spend an hour writing a response to kind of defend what I was talking about or what I was doing. And now I'm just like, just sticking my middle finger, like, I don't care. You don't have to understand me. You don't have to like me. And also this polarity as well. It's really helped me to find my true people, like my real people, like yourself.
I think that's so important, right? So my theory around this, so most of the people that I work with are very similar to us, right? Like I don't always talk about it, and at the same time, we use our values, we use our language, our energy to attract the people that are right for us and on our frequency. But I get a lot of people who I only got my diagnosis of both ADHD and autism last year, and I only got them after tons and tons and tons and tons of clients of mine got their diagnosis because their kids were getting diagnosed, right? And even then I wasn't sure whether I needed it. And so I don't work with people who are neurodivergent. I work with people who are misfits. They may or may not have brains that work differently. But what I think happened, that we do have bodies that work differently. We have had an other experience in all of our life. And what I think happened during that period of time is that the whole world got put into a state of vigilance that most of us have been experiencing our whole lives.
Yeah.
And that meant that people who weren't used to needing to like be mindful or be conscientious or look for everything and all of that stuff, were doing it all the time. And then those of us who have been living our whole lives like that but weren't really aware of it, that was then turned up even more. And so that's why we get this and actually, everything's always working out for us, even when it's not working out for us. Then we get this beautiful thing where we have to, as a whole society, start to become really aware of our bodies and our nervous systems and our breath. And so what we've seen over that time was breath work became suddenly mainstream, cold water swimming suddenly became mainstream, talking about nervous systems, like all of this stuff, talking about neurodivergence, because we were, the lack of safety, the threat that we were all put under brought this to the surface. And I think that I think it's really genius the way that the universe works, the way that nature works, that even when something looks like it's, we see this in nature all the time with plants and with all sorts of things, when it looks like it's dying, it's not. And then the following year we get this glut or this extra bloom.
Yeah, I love that.
People pleasy stuff and the kind of being more authentic. Are there any particular ways that you've noticed, other than just showing up more or not editing stuff or choosing to like not engage in the response? Is there any other ways that you've seen it shift for you, and what has the impact of that been?
Yes, I think for me, one of the, like, just going back to nature, like talking about that, like I've always been very connected with nature. When I was young, my dad would take me on nature walks and teach me about different plants and like tell me what bird it was that could, by the sound of its song, and just all of these beautiful things. And I've always had that in my life, but now I find that this just being more natural in like every way. So about 10 years ago, I removed fluoride from my life. There was certain chemicals that I wanted to remove. There were certain things that I didn't feel very aligned with. And that's kind of grown as well a lot over the last couple of years. I think there's been a lot more awareness. And there's a point to this. But We're talking like I'm being okay with being me as a natural woman. Like that has really come through, and not having to, and also, you know, as a professional dancer, I was, you know, always made up. I worked in TV, so I sold jewelry and gemstones for various different TV channels. You know, there was always this element of being, you know, looking the way I should in inverted commas as a woman. And one thing that's come through all of this as well, again, it's that authenticity and that being okay with who I am, who I show up as. So yeah, I went through this, as I said, 10 months, 11 months of not dyeing my hair. And as you know, my hair was blue and pink and green and like every color under the sun for years and years. And so I was just embracing my gray. And that's been a really interesting thing as well, like going through this, being okay with just as I look, and not having to, I've never been one to use filters anyway, but like not have it like, oh, I can't take a photo because I don't have makeup on, or I can't record a video because I haven't got makeup on. Like, yeah, I mean, I've got some makeup on now. But it's probably the first time in, I don't know, a couple of weeks.
I don't know whether you know this. So do you know? So I dyed my hair a different color every week from 11, right? And the color that yours is now is the first color I ever did mine. And then like I got suspended at school, and they rewrote the rule book, the handbook at school, because I objected. That I got suspended for dyeing my hair an unnatural color, and I was like, the rule book doesn't say that I can't. And so they changed, and then it's like, and people bleach their hair and they dye it brown. So they changed the rules in the handbook to say you can't dye it an unnatural color because of me.
Wow.
And so it had been pink and it had been green and it had been blue. It was like, it was different all the time. And I cut it and had all of these things. And when I learned 6-7 years ago now, 6 years, when I learned why we bleach our hair, like I started bleaching at 11 and I wanted it like platinum blonde. I wanted to be really Madonna. I wanted to be really Marilyn, right? And I kind of had this whole look, and it was really important to me and part of my armor, I think, in some ways. When I learned that it was about making us look like virginal young girls,
Wow.
or because that's why the only people who have platinum white hair are virginal young girls, or very, you know, otherwise you bleach it and you have to, if you've ever committed to bleaching your hair, it's something you have to continue to do, right? And you get really addicted because it's your roots come through, or it's brassy, it's not white enough, like all of that. And you can really tell someone who has money to someone who doesn't. So the other reason that people bleach their hair, and why Marilyn had the white hair and all of that, is to show how much money they had, because it looked good. And when I learned that, I couldn't in integrity continue to bleach my hair. But I also couldn't, you know, for those who know my story, who've read my book, I couldn't hold my own gaze without vomiting, right? Like I had such body dysmorphia around how I looked that I couldn't hold my own gaze without vomiting. And so it's been a whole journey. And by 6 years ago, I'd got to a place where I could look at myself and was feeling okay in my body and in my skin and with my reflection, as long as I had hair. And I would often say to my best friend, I mean, if I didn't have hair, like who would even look at me? Which is hilarious, because at school I was bullied for this hair massively. You know, I got called cousin it and why woolhead, and just, you know, people would pull it, stick things in it, like all of the things, right? And so I didn't know, I could not be me without my hair and without it being a thing. So I shaved my head. I went from having pink hair, shaved it overnight, and it was huge. It was such a like existential identity, like who even am I? Can I meet and love myself? Wow. Without looking a certain way. And then I grew it back, and I really wanted to grow it back without bleach. And in 2017, it got to about here. And I was in Bali, and the bits of it that are a little bit blonde went green in a swimming pool. So I then I put some color in it, but it was about here. And then I really wanted to grow the grey out and have it long and grey. And so it is now, 4 years of growth. and no hair dye. And it's such a thing for me to be able
I
to.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it. As soon as I'd kind of done mine with the henna, and it was amazing. It was like an alchemy process, right? So you got the henna powder and then warm water, and then I put some apple cider vinegar in there because the acidity can like change it a slightly different color, make it brighter, and some honey that was nourishing. And as a witch myself, and I love in working with plants, and it was like a lovely process. I loved it, and then I went to go and see a friend of mine, Nick, who I know that you know as well, and she did all of my hair, and it was amazing. And then I got outside, and I'm like, don't know if I prefer the grey, and it wasn't oh my god, I'm grey. I was just a bit bored with it.
I get
Um,
that. I get that once a month, day 23 and day 24 of my cycle. And so I literally have a note in my calendar, and all of my friends know to tell me that I'm not allowed to diet on 23, 24. So yeah, I really, really hear you, because I now think, oh, it'd be really fun to change it. I'm so bored of it, but it would also take a really long time to get it back to being this. So I'm going to
yeah.
stick now.
Yeah, I'd got pretty much a year's worth of the grey, and now obviously henna doesn't wash out, but I've got some dreadlock extensions which I'm putting in. So it's interesting you talking about shaving your head. So I've wanted to have dreadlocks for the longest time, and I've got very thick hair, lots of hair, and again, it's like an identity thing. My hair has always been a big identity thing with me. Hair and breasts. And yeah.
So the same. We're very similar. There's a lot of what I love about this is I'm gonna do a little link just into my the program that I'm promoting at the moment, which is Aligned and Expressed, is in some ways around all of this stuff, right? Like really meeting the good girl. It's around like the things that we get to do to put us back into alignment, like noticing when we're not, when we're morphing into other people, when we're becoming our partner or our client or our, a boss.
Yes.
And then really, so looking at alignment and expression and the ways that we express, and not just verbally, not just eloquently, and not just with words, but also looking at sexuality as a form of expression, looking at adornment, and how we do, what we do with our hair and the jewelry that we wear and tattoos, like all of that is part of our expression. So I love this topic, and if anyone wants to come and play, there are some spaces left for that.
Oh, sounds amazing.
I have loved this conversation. I'm going to wrap it up, and we're going to talk in the Patreon part of the podcast a little bit about I want to talk about, so for those of you who don't know, and I think it is in the show notes somewhere as well, Emma let go of her business, of her very successful business, and let go of and released a house that she had lived in for the longest time and really, really loved, and is stepping into the unknown and a journey, and the next part of her journey. And for those of you who are anything like me, those of you who are manifesting generators, or who listen to soul and spirit and source when it says do this, like me moving to Spain, I want to talk to you a little bit about that, and like the people pleasing part, and all of the process of kind of navigating giving up success for the unknown. So if you're up for that, we're going to talk about that in the Patreon part of the podcast.
I'm totally up for that. I'm actually covered in goosebumps listening to you even talk about that. So yeah, that's like it's the biggest thing, literally the biggest thing I've ever done in my entire life. So yeah, let's go talk about that.
And links wise, I'm going to put all your links and stuff in the main podcast piece. If people want to come and find you and hear more about your opinions and your rewilding and your untamedness and gems and like just all of the stuff, where is the best place to come and find you?
At the moment, my free Facebook group, which is called the Wild Child Crystal Collective, that kind of is geared more around crystals, herbalism, traditional witchcraft, shamanic practices, and my TikTok, which is called the Wild and Untamed Way. I'll be sharing lots more there with my off-grid journey, and yeah, I don't know, I'm feeling a bit more called to work in that short form video rather than I don't know, there's some resistance coming up around like Facebook at the moment, but both of them are where you'll be able to find me.
Listen, I'm going to drop all the notes in, and I'm so appreciative of just having these conversations, which are full of tangents and honesty and, you know, just raw, real combos. Thank you for trusting me and for coming in and having this chat.
Thank you. And thank you for holding this space and for inviting beautiful people to come and just express and share and just having this safe environment. It's so important, and you're really appreciated. Thank you, darling.